Picture this, a tiny island, so small you could walk across it in just a few minutes, reachable only by being lowered in a basket onto a rocky cliff face. Sounds pretty isolated, right?
It is.
This is Stevens Island off the coast of New Zealand. And until the late 1800s, it was home to a bird found nowhere else in the world, the Stevens Island wren.
Yes. What makes this story so interesting is that the wren couldn't fly. It was perfectly adapted to this unique, isolated environment. Stevens Island, or Takapura, as it's known by the Maori, was truly a haven for unique species, before humans arrived.
It's like a real-life Jurassic Park, but with birds instead of dinosaurs. But as we all know, paradise is rarely untouched forever.
Mm.
And even humans arriving with good intentions, like, say, building a lighthouse, can have unintended consequences.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The construction of the lighthouse in 1894 really marked a turning point for the island. Almost the entire island was covered in native forest, but a staggering 90% of it was destroyed. First to clear land for the lighthouse and the buildings around it. And as if that wasn't enough, grazing and fire further changed the ecosystem. It was a delicate balance to begin with.
So even before we get to the infamous cat, Tibbles, it seems like the island was already in trouble. It's a reminder that even our best intentions, our actions, can have big, lasting effects.
Absolutely. And the story of the Stevens Island wren is a powerful example of this principle. It shows how even a tiny bird on a remote island can tell a story about, well, the interconnectedness of life and the choices we make.
So we've got this island sanctuary disrupted by human activities. Let's talk about the wren itself. How was this unique bird discovered?
Well, the lighthouse keeper, David Lyle, was an amateur ornithologist. He was a bird enthusiast.
Yep.
And he noticed that his cat, Tibbles, kept bringing him these unusual little birds, unlike anything he'd seen before.
So Tibbles, the lighthouse keeper's cat, actually played a role in discovering a new species. That's a bit ironic.
Yeah. It really is a strange twist of fate, yeah. Lyle realized they were unique. He prepared a specimen and sent it to Sir Walter Buller, a leading ornithologist in New Zealand at the time.
What happened next? Did Buller confirm that it was a new species?
He did. Buller recognized the bird as a completely new species of wren, flightless, and endemic to Stevens Island, meaning it was found nowhere else in the world.
This must have been a huge discovery for the scientific community, a brand new species of bird. And a flightless one at that. It's like finding a missing piece of a puzzle, an evolutionary puzzle.
It was a significant find, absolutely. But as we'll see, this discovery would lead to a series of events that, well, ultimately led to the wren's extinction.
This is where things take a darker turn, right? It seems like the wren's moment in the scientific spotlight was also the beginning of its downfall.
Sadly, that's true. The story of the Stevens Island wren is a cautionary tale. It's about the unintended consequences of human actions, even those driven by scientific curiosity.
Okay, so we've got habitat destruction, we've got a new predator on the scene, and now a new element, the attention of the scientific community. Let's delve into that next.
So the scientific interest in the wren, while understandable, had some unexpected consequences. And that's where Henry Travers comes in. He was a natural history dealer, and he saw an opportunity to profit from this newfound rarity.
So the allure of the exotic, of the rare. I'm guessing this is where things get complicated.
Indeed. Travers, driven by the potential for profit, he persuaded Lyle to sell him wren skins. And this sparked a rivalry not only between Travers and Lyle, but also with Buller, who was also very keen to acquire specimens for his own research.
So now we have two prominent scientists, Buller and Travers, both wanting specimens of this rare bird. Plus, a dealer trying to cash in on the frenzy. It sounds like a recipe for disaster for the wren population.
It was. This was a time when the idea of conservation was really in its early stages, you see. And the impact of overcollection, the potential for it to wipe out an entire species, that wasn't fully understood yet. And the Stevens Island wren became, well, a tragic victim of this lack of awareness.
It's heartbreaking to think that the very act of trying to study and document this unique bird, that it might have contributed to its extinction. It's a stark reminder of the ethical considerations that come with scientific exploration.
Absolutely. It highlights the need for balance, for an approach that values scientific discovery, but also prioritizes the protection and preservation of vulnerable species.
This brings us to, well, a crucial point in this story. The role of Tibbles, the cat, in the extinction of the wren. Is she really the villain that she's often made out to be?
Tibbles has become almost a legend, often portrayed as the sole culprit responsible for wiping out an entire species. But like most historical narratives, the reality is, well, more complex.
So there's more to this story than just a cat with a taste for birds.
Much more. While Tibbles undoubtedly played a part, it's important to remember that she was just one individual within a much larger context. Lyle himself mentioned in his writings that there were actually multiple cats on the island, likely the result of, well, Tibbles having kittens and possibly other people bringing their own cats to the island.
So it wasn't just one cat, but a whole population of feral cats. That changes things quite a bit.
It does, and it underscores the devastating impact that invasive species, even ones that seem harmless like domestic cats, can have on fragile island ecosystems.
This raises a big question. If Tibbles wasn't alone, how much did these cats really contribute to the wren's extinction? Is it even possible to separate their impact from all the other factors we've talked about? The habitat destruction, the overcollecting?
That's a tough question. It's hard to say for sure, to tease apart the individual contributions of each factor with complete certainty, but we can look at historical records, at scientific research to try and piece together a more complete picture.
Let's do that. What do the records tell us about the number of wrens on the island? Before and after the cats arrived.
Well, that's where things get even more interesting. There's actually quite a bit of mystery surrounding the wren population and the number of specimens collected.
A mystery. Now I'm really intrigued. This deep dive just keeps getting more and more fascinating.
The records we have are incomplete, and sometimes they contradict each other. There are discrepancies in the number of specimens reported by Travers and Buller, and some museum collections were poorly maintained, which means some specimens could have been lost or misidentified.
So we're dealing with a historical puzzle then. Trying to reconstruct the full story of the Stevens Island wren is like piecing together a mosaic with some pieces missing.
Precisely. But that doesn't mean we can't learn from what we do know. The story of the Stevens Island wren, even with its gaps and uncertainties, it teaches us valuable lessons about the fragility of island ecosystems, the impact of invasive species, and the complex relationship between humans and the natural world.
And it underscores the importance of responsible scientific practices, careful documentation, and a deep respect for the delicate balance of life on Earth.
Exactly.
It's amazing that even with these incomplete records, we're still learning so much from a story like this. It really makes you think, what would Stevens Island even be like today if the wren had survived?
That's a great question. It's tough to know for sure, but given how isolated the island is and the wren's unique, adaptations, it's likely it would have thrived.
It is fascinating to think about a tiny island untouched by all the pressures of the modern world and where this flightless bird could have just lived undisturbed, almost like a lost world, frozen in time.
But like you said before, humans always bring change. Even if those wrens had somehow survived the habitat destruction, the predators, well, in the modern era, they would have faced new threats. Think climate change or even diseases spreading from the mainland.
It's a sobering thought that even in the most remote parts of the planet, we still see the impact of human activities. Makes the story of the Stevens Island wren all the more, poignant.
It does, and it makes the need for conservation even more urgent. We can't just react to crises. We have to actively protect vulnerable species and ecosystems, before it's too late.
So the wren's story isn't just about the past, it's a call to action, right? For the present and the future. It's about understanding that we're all connected and that our choices have big consequences.
You got it. The Stevens Island wren's legacy is a reminder that even the smallest actions can have a huge impact on the natural world. It makes us think about our relationship with nature and, how we shape its future.
You mentioned some discrepancies in the records about the number of wren specimens. Can you talk more about that? What exactly makes this a mystery?
It's a bit of a scientific whodunit. Buller and Travers, they both publish their findings, but their numbers don't really add up. There's a lot of uncertainty about how many specimens they actually collected, where they ended up, and how many might have been lost over time.
It's like a puzzle, but with missing pieces. What could explain these discrepancies?
Well, you got to remember that back then, in the late 19th century, record-keeping wasn't what it is today. It wasn't as meticulous. Some specimens could have been misidentified or damaged, maybe even lost because of how they were stored.
So some of those wrens, they could have ended up in a museum drawer, mislabeled, maybe even thrown away without anyone realizing how important they were.
That's definitely possible. And then there's the ethics of it all. Back then, collecting specimens was seen as, a normal way to advance science. But we know now that over-collecting rare species can have terrible consequences.
So some wrens might have been lost due to simple carelessness or poor record keeping, while others were taken intentionally, Maybe because people wanted to own these rare birds or make money off them.
It's a complicated issue. It's easy to judge the past, but it's important to understand the historical context. The whole idea of conservation was just developing. People didn't fully grasp how much human actions could drive a species to extinction.
It makes you wonder if the Stevens Island wren would have even faced the same fate if it were discovered today, with all we know now about conservation and, well, ethical collecting.
It's a question we can't really answer, but it's certainly worth considering. The story of the Stevens Island wren shows how far we've come in our understanding of conservation, but also how much further we still have to go.
What are some of the biggest lessons we can learn from all of this, both for scientific practices and how we view the natural world in general?
One crucial thing is responsible collecting. Scientists now know that they need to prioritize the well-being of species, over just getting specimens. There are strict guidelines now to make sure collecting is done sustainably and ethically.
So it's not just about gaining knowledge, it's about doing it in a way that doesn't harm anything and ensures that the species can survive.
Exactly. The Stevens Island wren also highlights how vulnerable islands are. They're often home to unique species found nowhere else, which makes them more susceptible to threats. Habitat destruction, invasive species, disease, you name it.
A good reminder that these isolated places, these havens for biodiversity, they need special attention and protection. We can't repeat those same mistakes from the past.
Absolutely. The Stevens Island wren story is a call to action for us to become better stewards of the planet, recognizing that we're all interconnected and understanding that our actions have consequences that, well, reach far and wide.
It reminds us that we're not just watching the natural world, we're part of it. Our choices, as individuals and as a society, will determine the fate of so many species, including our own.
Couldn't have said it better myself, and that's a message that everyone needs to hear.
And speaking of hearing this message, let's talk about the wren's legacy. How has its story shaped conservation efforts, especially in New Zealand?
The Stevens Island wren, even though it's extinct, has become a symbol for conservation in New Zealand. Its story has helped raise awareness about protecting vulnerable species and, well, the devastating impact of invasive predators.
So even in extinction, the wren is still serving a purpose. It's inspiring action and change.
Exactly. New Zealand has been a leader in, well, developing and using new conservation strategies, especially when it comes to restoring islands. They've had amazing success getting rid of invasive predators from islands, which has allowed native species to come back and thrive.
That's encouraging. What are some of the specific things they're doing to protect vulnerable species on islands like Stevens Island?
Well, New Zealand has invested a lot in biosecurity to stop new invasive species from even getting in. They've also got these ambitious programs to eradicate the predators that are already there, like rats, cats, and stoats.
So it's a multi-pronged approach, trying to prevent new threats and actively removing the ones already there. That sounds like a huge undertaking.
Oh, it is. But the results are there. On many islands where these programs are in place, native bird populations have bounced back incredibly and whole ecosystems are coming back to life.
A testament to the resilience of nature, when we give it a chance.
It really is, and it gives us hope that even when things look really tough, we can make a difference. The Stevens Island wren, while a tragedy, has become this catalyst for positive change. Even in loss, there can be growth and renewal.
It's a really powerful message of hope. And it resonates with the idea that we're all connected and that we all have a responsibility to care for our planet and everything that lives on it. It's really inspiring to see how far we've come with island restoration and conservation. Shows that we can learn from those past mistakes and actually take steps to protect nature.
Yeah, it speaks volumes about the dedication of, well, conservationists, scientists, local communities, everyone working together to make a real difference.
We've covered the science, the ecological side of the Stevens Island wren, but I'm curious about the people. What about those who lived on the island, especially David Lyle, the lighthouse keeper? How did he feel about the wren disappearing?
It's a good question. Lyle's writings give us a glimpse into his thoughts, He seemed to genuinely appreciate nature and was fascinated by that wren.
So he wasn't just some detached observer. He actually had a connection with the island and the wildlife there.
Yeah, and I think you can sense a sadness in his writing, maybe even some regret about the wren being gone. It seems like he understood that humans, well, had played a role in that.
It's a good reminder that the people in these stories, they weren't just names in a book. They were real people with emotions, with their own experiences.
Absolutely. Their stories add a whole other layer to our understanding of the past.
As we wrap up our deep dive into this story, the Stevens Island Wren, what's the one thing you hope listeners take away?
I think the most important takeaway is this. Every species, no matter how small, how seemingly insignificant, they all have a role to play. The extinction of even one species can have a ripple effect. The health of our planet it really depends on the diversity and, the interconnectedness of everything living on it.
It's a powerful reminder that we're not just taking care of the Earth, we're a part of it. What we do, both as individuals and as a whole, it really shapes the future of life on this planet.
That's exactly it. The story of the Stevens Island wren, it's tragic, but it can be a catalyst for positive change. It can inspire us to learn from the past, appreciate that connection between all living things, and make choices that ensure a healthy future for all.
Well said. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the story of the Stevens Island Wren. It's a story that reminds us of the power of curiosity, how fragile nature is, and how important our role is in, well, taking care of this planet. Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep learning.